5 women. 11 weeks. 1 square mile of London. And a killer who walked away from every single one of them. Never caught, never charged, never identified with certainty. Over a century later, Jack the Ripper remains the most famous unsolved serial murder case in human history. Not because of the number of victims, not because of the era, but because of what the case revealed about a city, a system, and the women it was willing to forget, and what it still refuses to tell us about the man who hunted them. Tonight we go inside Whitechapel, 1888. The 5 victims, the letters, the suspects, and the question that 136 years of investigation have never answered. Who was he? It was 1888 in London, England. Queen Victoria had just celebrated her 51st year on the throne. Britain was prosperous, advancing in technology, science, and medicine, proud of its place on the world stage. But not all of London was prospering. Whitechapel, a district in the east end of the capital, was a world apart from the city of grand buildings and gaslit avenues that the rest of Britain celebrated. Since the 1840s, waves of Jewish and Irish immigrants had settled in the area, drawn by cheap lodgings and available work. The overcrowding that followed brought poverty, disease, and suffering, on a scale the city's comfortable classes preferred not to see. The streets were filthy. Death was a constant companion. Social unrest was not uncommon. By October 1888, the Metropolitan Police would report that over 1,200 prostitutes were working in Whitechapel alone. 62 brothels operated in the district. For women with no other options, the streets of Whitechapel were both workplace and danger zone. And in the autumn of 1888, a predator had entered those streets. Subscribe to Unresolved Years Mysteries right now. Turn on notifications. Hit the like button. We go deeper than the headline, and this case has more layers than almost any other we have covered. Now let's meet the victims. From the 3rd of April 1888 until the 13th of February 1891, 11 murders took place in the Whitechapel area. The Metropolitan Police logged them collectively as the Whitechapel murders. Of the total, 5 women were linked definitively and became known as the Canonical 5. Believed by investigators to be the work of one killer. The first of the 5 was Mary Ann Nichols, known as Polly. She was 43 years old. She lived in a common lodging house in Spitalfields. Her life had unraveled following the collapse of her marriage. Accusations of infidelity, counter-accusations, a separation that led her through lodging houses, workhouses, a brief stint as a domestic servant, and eventually into alcoholism and prostitution. At approximately 3:40 in the morning on August 31st, 1888, the body of Mary Ann Nichols was discovered by a cart driver on Bucks Row. Police arrived quickly. No disturbances had been reported. At 4 a.m., Dr. Henry Llewellyn was called to the scene. He concluded that Mary had been dead for no longer than 30 minutes. Her throat had been slit twice, left to right. Her abdomen had been mutilated. A deep, jagged wound. Incisions on the right side. There was very little blood at the scene. Dr. Llewellyn clarified that the mutilation had occurred after death. Mary Ann Nichols was laid to rest on September 6, 1888, at the City of London Cemetery. 8 days later, another body. Annie Chapman was 47 years old. Born Annie Eliza Smith, she had married a coachman and together they had 3 children. Only one, a daughter, survived beyond adolescence. The deaths of her other children, combined with the disability of her son John, sent both Annie and her husband spiraling into alcohol dependency. They separated around 1886. With little income, Annie became depressed. She earned her nickname, Dark Annie, during these years. She tried crochet work and flower selling to get by, but when money ran out, she turned to the streets. In the very early hours of September 8, 1888, Annie found herself without money for a bed for the night. A witness reported seeing her at 5:30 that morning, talking to a man described as of shabby genteel appearance, wearing a deerstalker hat and a dark overcoat. Just before 6 a.m., her body was discovered by a market porter in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. Police found a comb, a piece of muslin, 2 pills for Annie's lung condition, and a torn envelope at the scene. The rings she had been wearing were gone. They were never recovered. Annie Chapman's throat had been cut. She had been horrifically disemboweled, her intestines placed over her shoulders. A section of her uterus was missing. Her tongue protruded, her face swollen, suggesting asphyxiation had also played a role. Annie Chapman was buried at Manor Park Cemetery on September 14, 1888. 2 victims. 8 days apart. And investigators were only beginning to understand what they were dealing with. Subscribe to Unresolved Years Mysteries right now. Turn on notifications. Hit the like button. This channel covers cases like this with the depth they deserve. Now let's get to the night that changed everything, the double event. On the night of September 29th into the early hours of September 30th, the Ripper killed twice. These 2 murders, committed within 45 minutes of each other, became known as the double event, and they threw London into a panic that the city would not recover from for months. Elizabeth Stride was Swedish-born. She had been registered as a prostitute in Gothenburg before moving to London in 1866, where she married a ship carpenter named John Thomas Stride. She became known around the East End as Long Liz. She told acquaintances a dramatic story that her husband and 2 of her 9 children had died in the sinking of the Princess Alice on the Thames. Investigators would later discover this was entirely fabricated. John Stride had died of tuberculosis in 1884. The couple had no children. On the evening of September 29th, Liz had been seen with a man wearing a bowler hat, a matching suit, and a mustache, carrying a package. At 1 a.m. on September 30th, her body was discovered in Dutfield's yard by Louis Deemschutz, steward of a nearby workers' club. He had driven into the yard with a pony and cart when the horse suddenly shied. He struck a match. Blood was pouring from Liz's slashed throat. Of all the canonical 5, Elizabeth Stride had the least injuries. It is believed the Ripper was interrupted, that he fled in panic before he could complete what he had begun. He did not go home. 45 minutes later, in Mitre Square, the body of Catherine Eddowes was found by a police constable who had patrolled that exact area only 15 minutes before. Catherine was one of 10 children, born in Wolverhampton, later moving to London. She had a long-term partner, Thomas Conway, with whom she had 2 sons and a daughter, but she deserted the family in 1880 and found a new partner, John Kelly, in Spitalfields. Unable to pay rent, she turned to prostitution. Conway had even taken a new surname specifically to prevent Catherine from finding him or their children. On the 29th of September, the same night as Liz Stride's murder, Catherine had been found drunk by a constable and spent a couple of hours in a jail cell. She gave the police a false name. She was released in the early hours and last seen alive at 1:35 a.m. by 3 separate witnesses. What the Ripper did to Catherine Eddowes showed an escalation. Her throat was cut. Like Annie Chapman, her intestines had been pulled over her shoulders. Her left kidney and uterus were missing. A portion of her apron had been cut away. And for the first time, he attacked the face. V-shapes cut into her cheeks. Her nose sliced. Her ears punctured. The tip of her nose removed. That piece of apron was found later that morning near a message written on a wall in Golston Street. The message, written in chalk, read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." It became known as the Golston Street Graffito. Whether it was written by the Ripper or by someone else entirely remains debated to this day. Elizabeth Stride was buried October 6th in East London Cemetery. Catherine Eddowes followed 2 days later at the City of London Cemetery. Their double murder was a media explosion. And then the letters began. Rumors had already begun circulating that someone was sending letters claiming to be the killer. On September 27, 1888, 2 days before the double event, the Central News Agency of London received a letter. Many believed it was a hoax created by a journalist, but authorities thought it might be authentic, noting its knowledge of the crimes and a distinctive writing style filled with spelling and punctuation errors, written in red ink. It began, "Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. It continued with claims of enjoyment, of deliberateness, of intent to continue. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. The letter promised to cut off a victim's ears and send them to police. It was signed, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. This letter gave the killer his name, a name that has echoed for over a century. Whether it was genuine or a fabrication, the world had a name now. On October 1st, the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee received a small package. Inside, half of a preserved human kidney, and a letter that has since become known as the most chilling communication of the entire case, the From Hell letter. It read, "From Hell. Mr. Lusk, sir. I send you half the kidney I took from one woman and preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only wait a while longer. Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk." The kidney was examined by a medical professional who concluded it had come from a woman around 45 years old and had been removed within the past month. Catherine Eddowes was 46 years old. Her left kidney was missing. Friday, November 9, 1888. Jack the Ripper's final victim. Mary Jane Kelly was born in Limerick, Ireland, around 1863. She had come to London after a difficult early life, a husband killed in a mining explosion, years of moving between cities. She had worked as a prostitute since arriving in London, and was known in the area as Dark Mary, a woman who sang Irish songs and was well liked in the neighborhood. A widowed neighbor noticed Mary returning home drunk in the early hours of the night, singing an Irish ballad at around 1 a.m. Around 1:30, the singing stopped. Other residents at the lodging house where Mary lived reported hearing cries of murder at 4 a.m. In the East End, that kind of cry was not uncommon. The women ignored it. Later that morning, Mary's landlord sent his assistant Thomas to collect 6 weeks of outstanding rent, 29 shillings. Thomas arrived just after 10:45 a.m., no answer at the door. He pushed his arm through a crack in the window, moved aside the coat being used as a curtain, and saw what the Ripper had left behind. What was done to Mary Jane Kelly was the most extreme and prolonged of all 5 killings. Unlike the other murders, which had taken place outdoors, in the open, under time pressure, this one happened inside, in the privacy of her own room. He had all the time he needed. Her body lay on a blood-soaked bed. Her face had been hacked beyond recognition, lips cut multiple times, eyebrows, cheeks, nose, and ears partially removed. The wounds were so severe, she had to be identified by her eyes and hair. Her abdomen and thighs had been severely mutilated, tissues of her neck cut to the bone, both breasts removed. Her arms carried multiple deep, jagged wounds. The viscera had been removed from her abdominal cavity. Beneath her head, one breast and her uterus had been placed. Her heart was gone. Flaps of skin from her thighs were placed on the bedside table. These were the first things Thomas saw through that crack in the window. Mary Jane Kelly was 25 years old. She was buried at the Roman Catholic Cemetery in Leytonstone on November 19, 1888. No family members could be traced to say goodbye. 5 women, 5 lives, and a killer who was never found. If this case matters to you, subscribe to Unresolved Years Mysteries right now. Turn on notifications. Hit the like button. This channel exists for cases like this one, the ones that carry real weight. Now let's talk about who Jack might have been. The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee was formed out of public frustration with the Metropolitan Police's handling of the case. Investigators focused primarily on men with anatomical knowledge, surgeons, butchers, slaughterers, physicians, based on the precision of the wounds. Police Surgeon Thomas Bond disagreed. He believed the killer was acting out of revenge and possibly erotic motivation, and that the anatomical precision was overstated. The debate about motive never fully resolved, but names began to emerge. The Metropolitan Police concluded that the killer was likely upper class, in full employment, all murders falling on weekends or public holidays, and local to Whitechapel. Montague John Druitt, a barrister, committed suicide shortly after Mary Kelly's death. His body was pulled from the River Thames on December 31, 1888. His family had a documented history of mental illness, but on the day of Mary Kelly's murder, he was playing cricket in Dorset. Severin Klosowski, known as the Borough Poisoner, a Polish immigrant who murdered 3 wives using poison. Inspector Frederick Aberline, the lead detective on the Ripper case, favored him as a top suspect. Klosowski had lived in Whitechapel during 1888, working as a barber. He was hanged in 1903. The question of whether someone switches their method from poisoning to mutilation was never resolved. John Pizer, a Polish shoemaker known locally as Leather Apron. He had prior convictions for stabbing, and had made minor assaults on prostitutes. But he had a strong alibi for the murders of Mary Ann Nichols and Annie Chapman. William Henry Barry, a Dundonian who strangled his wife Ellen in 1889, and extensively mutilated her abdomen before packing her body in a suitcase. He was hanged in Dundee. The executioner publicly promoted the idea that Barry was the Ripper. Francis Tumblety, an Irish-born American who claimed to be an herb doctor and had amassed a significant fortune. He had been arrested for involvement in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, then released without charge. He held a documented and intense hatred of women, particularly prostitutes. In Washington, D.C., he had boasted of possessing a collection of preserved uteruses from women of every class. In 1888, he was in Whitechapel. On November 7th, he was arrested for engaging in then illegal homosexual acts. He was released on bail and fled to France weeks later. No witness descriptions from the murder sites matched his appearance. Tumblety died in 1903 of heart disease. Aaron Kosminski, the name most associated with the Ripper in modern analysis. A Jewish-Polish immigrant who worked as a hairdresser in Whitechapel during 1888. In 1891, he was institutionalized in an insane asylum. Police had named Kosminski as a suspect, though confusion remained about whether they meant Aaron or another patient at the same asylum referred to as David Cohen, whose real name was Nathan Kosminski. Aaron had been mentally unstable since around 1885, experiencing auditory hallucinations and extreme paranoia, possibly schizophrenia. He had threatened a woman with a knife and thrown a chair, but these were the only documented incidents of violence on his record. He eventually became severely malnourished and died aged 53, weighing just 44 kilograms. The other patient, Cohen, was described as far more violent and destructive. Many researchers consider him the stronger candidate. In 2019, a DNA analysis claimed to link Aaron Kosminski to a shawl, reportedly found at the scene of Catherine Eddowes' murder. The methodology was challenged by other scientists, and the finding remains contested. Even with modern forensic tools, the identity of Jack the Ripper has never been confirmed. 5 women in 11 weeks. 5 names that deserve to be said. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. Women whose lives were shaped by poverty, hardship, and the absence of anything resembling a safety net. Women who were, in many cases, described in the newspapers of their time as little more than unfortunate wretches. Their lives rendered acceptable losses by a society that looked away from the East End. The man who killed them was never brought to justice. He may have died in obscurity. He may have fled. He may have lived out his years in plain sight. We do not know. What we know is that he chose women who were vulnerable, who worked in the dark, who had no protection from a city that was not designed to protect them, and that the Metropolitan Police, for all the resources eventually thrown at the case, never found him. His haunting legacy lives on, not as glory, but as a reminder of the women he murdered in the lamp-lit streets of Victorian London, and of a justice system that failed them while it was happening, and still cannot account for what was done. What do you think? Is Aaron Kosminski the most credible suspect, or do you believe the true identity of Jack the Ripper is still out there in an archive somewhere, waiting to be found? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe to Unresolved Years Mysteries if you haven't already. Turn on notifications. Cases like this one, cases that are 136 years old and still unsolved, deserve more than a passing mention. I'm Marcus Webb. Thank you for watching.